Hey, today we are talking about inequalities. And inequalities are kind of like equations, except for that the two sides are not equal or don't have to be equal. So whereas an equation uses this sign to show that the two sides are equal, inequalities do not use that sign. Inequalities use these signs. And we'll talk about what these signs mean. They might look familiar to you. Okay, so inequalities, their in part means not, and equality means equal. So it means not equal. So both sides do not have to be equal now. An example of this is when you have something that says like 3 is less than 4, you're comparing those two things. 3 is not equal to 4. 3 is less than 4. And you might remember from, if you worked on inequalities before, that 3 is less than 4, that you would use the symbol like this. And this reads the exact same way as 3 is less than 4. Okay? And if you aren't sure about that part with that symbol yet, don't worry, we'll go over it. On the other hand, you might have that exact same thing but flipped around. So now, if we write it the other way, we have to use greater because 4 is greater than 3. And we just flip the whole thing around to 4 is greater than 3. So what inequalities let us do is they let us compare numbers, but they let us compare numbers using symbols rather than just having to write out all the words. Okay, so what we're focusing on is the symbols for right now. And then next, we're going to work on how to graph those. So the first thing that's important to know is what those symbols are. So there's 4 symbols for inequalities, but we're just going to think about the first 2 for right now. And when we're talking about something being greater than something else, we have to make sure the big part of that sign is towards the bigger number. So what that looks like is this: the big part of the sign towards the bigger number, the little part of the sign towards the smaller number. Okay. Now, if the smaller number is on the other side, you just flip the sign. The smaller point goes to the smaller number. Okay. And again, remember that the big part of the sign goes to the big number and the small point goes to the smaller number. So these are kind of just visuals to help you see what side of the sign goes where. Some people think about it like, oh, which one would the alligator eat? I don't know if you've heard of that before. If you haven't, then you can ignore it. But that kind of is confusing to me, at least. And how I think about it is this part of the sign is a lot bigger than this little point. So I put the big part of the sign to the bigger number and the small part of the sign to the smaller number. Okay. So for these, we are going to write the symbol for each inequality. I want you to think about what symbol would go here. Would we use the greater than symbol or the less than symbol for this inequality? We know that these aren't equal, so we're comparing them. I know 3 is less than 17. So I'm going to put the smaller part of the symbol towards the 3, which means the little point, and then the open side is going to be to 17. The big part of the symbol goes to 17. Now, if it's flipped around, 17 is greater than 3, then we just flip the symbol. The big part of the symbol goes to the 3. Okay? Now, sometimes we're not going to have just straight up numbers. Sometimes it's going to be words that we have to translate, and it might have a variable with it. And we can just do the same thing. We just have to remember, is it less than or greater than? So here we have x something 4. X something 4. Is it greater than, less than? We know it's not equal to because it's not an equal sign. So I go back and I think to myself, okay, the big part of the sign goes to the bigger number. The big part of the sign goes to the greater number. So what this is saying is that x is bigger than 4. Okay, and technically how we say that is x is greater than 4. Okay. All right. So next we have to remember, now we have some more inequality symbols. So far we've only done the greater than and less than. There's 2 more that we need to think about. So this one says greater than, because the big part of the sign starts, so greater than. This one is less than. But there's two more symbols, and what those two more symbols are, this says less than or equal to. Oh, that needs to switch. Oops. That should be like this. That should be like that. So greater than or equal to, that little line means that it can be equal. So this is greater than or equal to, and this is less than or equal to. So it can be equal, but also can be greater than or less than. Okay. So let's go ahead and think about writing some of these. So if I have x is greater than or equal to, x is greater than or equal to 7, I think to myself, okay, the big part of the sign needs to go to x. So x is greater than, but then it says or equal to. So I would put that line underneath to show that x could be equal to 7. Now here's something that's important. Remember earlier how we could flip them around. We can also write 7 is less than or equal to x. Notice how the big part of the sign is still to the x and the little part of the sign is still to the 7. We just flipped the whole thing around. That's totally fair. We can do that. Okay, and so another example. Think about how he could write y is less than or equal to -2. So think about how you could write that. Take a minute to think about how you could write that. Y is less than or equal to -2. Think about how you would write that. So we can start with y, and we know that y is less. So we're going to put the small part of the sign, that small point, towards the y. And then it says or equal to -2. So that is how you would write that one. All right, one more. Let's do 5 is greater than n. 5 is greater than n. So we write 5, and it's saying 5 is greater. So I write the bigger part of the sign towards the 5. 5 is greater than n. So 5 is greater than n. Now here's the deal. Sometimes it has the line underneath. This time it does not, because it does not say equal to, it's not equal to n. So n cannot equal 5. 5 has to be greater than n. Or the other way we can write this is if we flip the whole thing around, keep the small part of the sign towards the n is less than 5. There's two different ways to write these. You can flip sides and flip the sign.